And the conclusion that we came to was that not only do we have a moral right to go and vanquish our enemy, we have a moral duty to do so. The Torah tells us that when somebody comes to kill you, you rise up and kill them first. So I've been yelling and screaming all along. It's moral duty. It's not like maybe can we. Is there a moral quandary, as Pierce Morgan likes to say? It's none of that. It's moral duty that we go in there, wipe out the enemy who explicitly says that they want to kill us.
I had said from day one, I know it sounds awful. Like, I know this sounds terrible. I mean, really. And I don't want people to come down and hate me for this, but I would have dropped a bomb on Gaza on October 8th for exactly that reason. Like, first of all, now these people have been suffering for a year and a half. And I'm someone who, like, I put down two dogs because I couldn't watch my dog suffer.
Forget about blowing up. We could bulldoze Gaza in 30 days, the entire Gaza down to rubble. And that could have been done 13 months ago. So there is, from a military and capability perspective, he said the reason it's not taking place is because of leadership and politics.
But I feel like, sometimes I feel like this is like almost like a message, like, wake up, like, stand up for yourself, like, yes, this thing happened. Like, it's meant to be like a wake up call. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously we know everything ultimately comes for God, but God also helps those that help themselves. So, like, we do have to do our part. We can't just sit back and say, oh no, God's going to take care of it. We have to do what we can as well. But I do think there is that piece that maybe some of it was meant to be like, wake up. Like, I've given you this country. You're back in this country. Act exactly what you said. Act like it's your country.
Hello and welcome to Humble Brag. My name is Nate Mendel. In the upcoming episode, I am sitting with Dara Saker. She's a physical therapist who lives in Israel. Her practice is called Musa Haguf, and it's in Cinema City in Jerusalem. She's also the host of a podcast called Holy Health. In it, she interviews health experts on a variety of topics and then brings on a Torah expert who puts it into context and places it within Torah and Judaism. You can find her on all podcast apps, but I will put a link to her podcast in the description. You could also find her on Instagram under DARAPT613. Dara PT613. Where in addition to physical therapy tips, she proudly uses the platform as a defender of Israel. Unfortunately, my high-resolution camera did not record, so we'll have to use the backup video that we recorded on Zoom, which is slightly pixelated, but I'm glad we had the conversation. At least we have the high quality audio. Enjoy. Welcome to Humble Brag. Thank you for joining me, Dara. We're both on Israel time zone, and it's in the evening, so I'm going to jump right into. I have a couple questions. We'll spend a few minutes on each one, and we'll see where it takes us.
Sounds great. Thank you for having me.
Some of these questions you may not know the answer to, but it'll be interesting to discuss regardless because they're ethical and moralistic questions, stuff that I've been thinking about. But I think it'll lead to a great conversation at either way. So don't be afraid to say, I don't know. A lot of this stuff I don't have the answer to, but this is why I think about these tougher questions. So the first question is, and I'm going to take a minute or two to explain my question because I like explaining it with context. When the war began, right after October 7th, I realized right away that we have a moral dilemma here because we're going to go kill people, right? So it's not about politics. It's not about entertainment, all that other crap that's going on online. I knew right away, and I even had here on Humble Brag, I was discussing it right away with my brother the next day. I'm like, what's the deal here? This is a moralistic question. This is not like politics and he said, she said. It's not drama. It's like, this is real deal. We're going to go slaughter tens of thousands of people. We know this is coming. So are we allowed to do it? What's like the rationale behind it from more of like a Torah perspective? I realized that right away. And the conclusion that we came to was that not only do we have a moral right to go and vanquish our enemy, we have a moral duty to do so. The Torah tells us that when somebody comes to kill you, you rise up and kill them first. So I've been yelling and screaming all along. It's moral duty. It's not like maybe can we. Is there a moral quandary, as Pierce Morgan likes to say, it's none of that. It's moral duty that we go in there, wipe out the enemy who explicitly says that they want to kill us. So this was a year ago. Now we're more than a year past. And I think the consensus, at least for religious Jews, is such that I described. It's like, it's okay. We understand that we have a moral right to do what we're doing. There's no confusion there. Now we're entering a different version of a similar ethical/moral question that I've been wondering about, and that's what I want to ask you about. Is it so? The dilemma that I think we find ourselves now, it's kind of brewing beneath the surface, is related to the fact that the hostage situation dragged out, and you can't have the two objectives of rescuing the hostages and vanquishing the enemy kind of oppose each other, meaning either one is a priority one or the other one is priority one. You can't have both as priority one. Right after October 7th, the consensus was, even though it wasn't public, I've heard this from military people, like there was an understanding that we're here to wipe out Hamas now. The hostages were secondary, however bad that sounds. Maybe even Netanyahu said that the first few days and then backtracked on it because he realized that's not going to go well in the political entertainment world. But like everyone understood, like we're taking out Hamas, like collateral damage here, there, but whatever's going to happen is going to happen. We have to take out Hamas. But what happened over the past year because of politics and people protesting and families and everything that's going on, it did actually shift. It appears that we're putting politics and possibly the hostages and their lives before taking out Hamas. And I imagine that that's one of the big reasons why this is dragging into this old fiasco that never seems to end. So the question is, what is moral? And I don't want to be, I don't want to not be sensitive to the families and the hostages whatsoever. I understand as a parent, I would want my child to come home. I would say screw morality. But as an intellectual, I'm just trying to understand the bigger picture because Netanyahu has a responsibility for 8 million, 10 million people in his country. It's much bigger than hostages. Is it ethical and moral that the country has to first focus on wiping out Hamas, which if they did that, they could actually pull it off very quickly? Or is it more ethical and moral that we put that on side and focus on the hostages? What are your thoughts around that whole topic?
Okay, so again, so a lot of this is my opinion, and certainly I, know that a lot of this is my opinion. I'm not an authority. Many people will disagree with me, and I've always been okay with talking and discussing anything with anyone. We can have differences of opinion as long as we respect each other. And so I think that there are a few different things here. Number one, as my brother, who's a rabbi, put it, when I did a whole episode on a healthy view of anti-Semitism, and I had him come on and talk about what the Torah says, one of the things he said is the Torah doesn't tell us to be moral, it tells us what to do. And so that's a very hard thing. Living in this world where we're all so worried about morality, when it comes to what you described, what should have happened after October 7th, when we know we needed to wipe out our enemies, and not just wipe out our enemies, like it's really graphic to hear. It's like you're supposed to kill every man, woman, child, and all of their animals. It's like everyone, you're supposed to destroy everyone. And if anyone in the world hears about that, like how awful does that sound? How vicious and horrible, we're supposed to be a light unto the nations. How does that make us sound like a light unto the nations? So I think that, that question of morality in general is a really difficult one. And I've actually had the same discussion even with my children because my children kind of come down on the opposite sides of me. They're like, Ima, nobody wants your opinion, thank God you don't have, a child who's over there. And, I hope if God forbid it was me that was over there, you would do everything in your power to get me back. But I'm looking at it, I think, with the greater worldview. And that greater view is that, you know, is it okay? This was the same thing I said, when people would say to me, you have one son. How do you let your son go into combat, right? You only have one son. Like you could keep him out of combat. But I always say, like, how can I say not my son? It's okay for you to lose your son, but I shouldn't lose my son. So I try to look at that picture of what's the greater good? Is it a little bit selfish? And again, no disrespect meant to any of the hostage families, to anybody who's gone through anything, but it's sort of like, is it okay for me to say I care, all I care about is getting my kid back? I don't care that maybe someday your kid's going to be taken. Like, is that okay to say? We know that that's the reality. We know that that's what's happened already. But I also think in talking about can we destroy Hamas, let's be ridiculous. Can we destroy Hamas? Like, meaning to actually destroy Hamas, we have to destroy Hamas. We have to destroy Hezbollah. We have to destroy the Houthis. We have to destroy Islamic Jihad. Like, there are so many people. They're all the same things. They're like these never-ending source of cockroaches. So I think that question of whether or not can we really do it, I think is a great question. But I think if we're going to look at how would we actually do it, would we actually be able to do it? Like, is there a way logistically that we could do it, that we could wipe out all of these different groups? Because even if we wipe out Hamas and Gaza, what about what's going on in Lebanon, Syria, ISIS, like all of these other different groups? And I think that when it comes to, again, this is just my opinion. I had said from day one, I know it sounds awful. Like, I know this sounds terrible. I mean, really. And I don't want people to come down and hate me for this, but I would have dropped a bomb on Gaza on October 8th for exactly that reason. Like, first of all, now these people have been suffering for a year and a half. And I'm someone who, like, I put down two dogs because I couldn't watch my dogs suffer. Like, maybe they could have lived another few months in pain and suffering. Like, I can't watch people suffer, you know? So knowing how much, like, I would, God forbid, a million times over, but like to know your kid's been there suffering at the hands of these like monsters, I think that I don't know, I don't have necessarily the best answer, but I think that we should do whatever we can if we can save them in missions like we've saved them the way we've gotten, information and we've saved a few, but to go trading thousands of terrorists I think is crazy because we're going to be back here again, God forbid, but we'll be back here again in 8 years or 10 years or 15 years. And, once they see it works, why isn't it going to be, 1,000 people that they take next time? And why is it that the world doesn't bat an eye? Like, here, these people took hostages and we're allowing them to dictate a ceasefire and the giving back of hostages. Like, none of it makes any sense. The entire thing is just so bat crazy that none of it just makes any sense.
The question is if that's taking place because they changed the priority. So I watched a commander give an interview, or one of the somebody who's high up in military in Gaza and knows this stuff well. He said there's no doubt, because there is some doubt amongst people, like, do we have the capability? This is not there's no problem with Israeli capability. And there never was. There is no problem with it. Forget about blowing up. We could bulldoze Gaza in 30 days, the entire Gaza down to rubble. And that could have been done 13 months ago. So there is, from a military and capability perspective, he said the reason it's not taking place is because of leadership and politics. The orders aren't coming down to do it. So there's no doubt whatsoever that the reason it's not taken care of in the way that we're discussing is not because of capability, it's because of politics. To me, it makes me think that they're putting the notion of saving these hostages first, possibly because of politics, possibly because of internal pressure from families, so on and so forth. But I do want to I want to dive deeper into that because you brought up a couple good points. So let's just unpack this. So for people who haven't thought about some of these points that you're mentioning, to me, I'm very familiar with it, but a lot of people might not be familiar with what we're talking about here. First of all, I like that you said that the Torah tells us what to do, right? It doesn't teach us morality. That is morality. What the Torah tells us is what we consider morality. So that's a fine distinction there. You asked if we could wipe them out. We absolutely can, and you're correct in asking if we could wipe out the broader Hamas, in other words, jihadism. That's a little bit more complicated, but I do think that the entire democratic world has a moral obligation to wipe out jihadism. Like, the democracies of the world need to come together and collectively wipe out jihadism globally, so it's done, like, fully and completely. But whatever. Some of the questions, just to go into, elaborate on what you were stating, revolves around the pain and suffering that they're going. There's pain and suffering on so many levels, so it becomes a real moralistic question of if we go in and wipe out Hamas, and it costs us 20 or 40 hostages, is it really more suffering or less? Because there's so much suffering going on from both sides. How many Palestinians are being killed, how many Arabs are being killed in Gaza, how many Jews are suffering, how many hostages are suffering. If women are being raped day to day, if they're being tortured, if they're psychological warfare, all of what's being done to them, all of that's happening on a daily basis. And then you have the entire, this side, like all the families and all the friends and all the Israelis just reeling and suffering day after day because they have our children. That's taking place. There's so displacements, hundreds of thousands, millions of people displaced. All of this is taking place. Why? Because there's 100 hostages and we don't want to wipe out Hamas. I don't know why. Maybe it's because we're trying to save the hostages. There's real things to consider in that realm. Now, I want to say, because everybody, like, people think it's easy to just say, oh, if it was your kid, I know if it was my kid, I would want my kid back. But as an intellectual and somebody who thinks about ethics and morality, you have to go a step beyond that. And I'll give an example how both could be right at the same time. I could easily sit here and say that if it was my child, I would want my child back. It doesn't make it false that potentially, I don't know, and this is the question I'm trying to get an answer to, but we may not. The question is, are we supposed to be wiping them out, and are the hostages supposed to be secondary? But picture a train track, two individuals on one track, one person on the other track. The person the single person on that track is a family friend, and the other ones you don't know. Obviously, you would want your family friend saved, but the moral thing is to save both of them. It's just that simple. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just a matter of one's looking at the holistic picture, one's personal. So I understand from a personal perspective, I would want my family member saved. From a moralistic perspective, we have to save the two. I wonder if we're in a situation like that. And if we are, it's quite shocking to see government hung up in that quandary for so long and nothing seems to be happening.
Well, if we flip the script a little bit more, if we go back to the fact that we know that October 7th, we had the plans, they knew it was coming. There's so much discrepancy. So then it goes beyond that moral question of just what do we want? It's what really went on. Like, who let their guard down? Who let it happen? Why did they let it happen? Why now are we not doing the things like you're saying? If we could have really bulldozed or we could really destroy Gaza, what are the forces at play that aren't allowing us to do a lot of these things that we should do? And I think that that's the deeper question, is that we know, unfortunately, there's a lot going on in the government. And I think that's a piece of why we're not being allowed to do certain things.
So are you insinuating that because there's unanswered questions on how it all unfolded, in combination with how it's unfolding, there's something to be read deeper there?
Yes.
Okay. One more point I want to stress on that particular question, which is going to remain unanswered, because again, I don't want to answer it. I'm just an honest and transparent person. Because again, I think intellectually, ethically, and more, I take all of emotion into account. I lean toward the notion that if I was a world leader, I imagine that the objective is to wipe out the enemy. Collateral damage may happen, but it's out of our hands. That's up to Hashem. Whoever's going to pass is going to. By the way, whoever's going to pass is going to pass anyway. Meaning they still have 100 hostages, but. Okay.
And isn't the expression "all's fair in love and war"? Like, isn't that a real expression that comes from somewhere?
Yeah.
Not a Torah
Yeah.
expression.
Yeah.
But
No,
let's
I've
call
heard.
it a world expression. I mean, look what went on in World War II with America and Hiroshima and, Pearl Harbor, like, meaning no one's innocent. Even what went on in Afghanistan, like, it's only when it's Israel that the world has a real problem with it.
Yeah.
When Syria wipes out 500,000 of
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
own
Yeah.
people, it's just a regular day.
The hypocrisy and all of that is just it's so nauseating and boring that I don't even go there. It's just like those who understand it understand it, and those who refuse to learn and understand it are not going to understand it. So it's just my final point on that was that. What I'm saying is I think I'm leaning toward the objective. The moral objective should be to wipe out Hamas. And very quickly, by the way, again, in the Torah says very few things about war. One of them is that it should be decisive and quick. A drawn-out war is not a moralistic war because everyone is suffering. Right now, millions of people are suffering. If you would have ended it on October 8th, like you said, October 8th, boom, it should have been over. That's moral. As soon as you drag it, everyone's suffering. It's no longer a moral war. taking what they show. By the way, if they put hostages first, which it seems they've done over the year, they've kind of shifted their focus to hostages. You solidify that taking hostages works, that it's an effective strategy. First of all, our enemies know it's an effective strategy, but you're really solidifying it that in the worst atrocity ever in this region, it worked again, and taking hostages works, which means it's going to happen over and over again.
Yep, 100%. You hit the nail on the head. You hit the nail on the head.
So we're not going to answer the question, but we can leave it at that. That there's strong arguments for why we need to get our priorities straight, I think. That being said, the families and all that, I don't know what to say. Like I said, if I was a family member, I would want my child home. But I also know that even for the families, this could have been over 10 months ago, 12 months ago.
Also, this is being led, like there's issues with the whole Bring Them Home Now organization because it's really a political organization. And my understanding is a lot of their funding actually comes through, I forgot what the organization is, America, that gets their funding from Qatar. So like, and
Okay, so those
they've
are
come out,
deeper.
and they've
That's
come
deeper
out,
inner workings of organizations and funding. Yeah, I don't
and
know about that stuff, but
they've also come out very, very strongly in getting rid of Bibi. So meaning you're mixing things, right? They're mixing things. Like if this is just about the hostages, it should just be about the hostages. There's too much being mixed with what went on October 7th, with
ugh, I
the
hate
people who are trying to
politics.
bring down the
Oh,
government. That's the whole problem, is that it becomes political.
it's
And every
nasty.
time I hear, I know this sounds awful, but every time I hear that it turns out that someone who thought their kid was a missing hostage, but it turned out they died October 7th, I am so happy for them because at least they know their kid wasn't suffering for the past year. And I know that sounds awful
Right,
on the one hand, but
right,
exactly what you're saying, like to me, that's more moral. Like having these people stuck there for so long.
right. A drawn out war where everyone's suffering, including the hostages, is not a moral war, and there's serious issues around. That's what I don't want to fully answer this question. I want people to think about it, but this is brewing beneath the surface because you're starting, for people living in Israel, you have to be sensitive who you speak around because there's a divide. There are people who are so strongly want the hostages home, and then there are people who just so strongly want Hamas to surrender for this to be done for the war, and that divide could get bigger and bigger. Okay, we'll leave that alone. That's definitely food for thought, and we'll move to the next thing.
Okay, can I say one last thing that doesn't have to do with the hostages, but
Sure.
that, I don't want to forget, my office sits across the street from Ohel Hagvua, like, which is the tent of heroes, right? For the over 800 soldiers that we've lost. Like, if we end this with the ability for Hamas to rebuild and do this again and again, then those 800 people have died in vain. So I just
Yeah.
want to say that,
There's I brought up 3 or 4 points. You brought up 3 or 4
Sorry.
points. Why? And no, all I'm saying is no. That's good. And that's like a total of 7, 8 points to consider on this question. There's a lot more than that. Even this is going light. There's a lot more. The argument to bring home the hostages is basic. It's simple. It's one argument. Sure, we have an obligation to save lives. It's family. It's friends. We need to bring them back. Everybody wants their family home. No question about it. It's simple. It's basic. It's human. It's good. Then there's a mountain of issues by avoiding taking out Hamas once and for all. All right. So the second one is, this is an observation that I've had, and I want to hear what you think about it. So just in following how this unfolded since October 7th, I noticed that Hamas and all, Iran and all its proxies, I should say, but Hamas and all its proxies, they were under the impression that they had a good strategy. This was a strategy, the whole attack, the hostages, the gruesome level of it, how the world's going to... It was all strategy. They thought that their strategy will work, and to a certain degree it did. The videos, all this different stuff that they did and they continue to do. That's why we have protests on campuses and all this craziness. People are falling for their propaganda and the crazy strategy and all this stuff. But I believe they thought that it would create such inner turmoil in Israel that it would maybe lead things to the brink of going over the top, whereby like maybe we could finally consider, a two-state solution or giving land, right? So, because obviously they had a strategy that they thought would come closer to their objective. I think in the first maybe 6 to 12 months, it seemed like maybe it was halfway effective. But what happened in retrospect, I believe, and this is why I'm wondering if you see the same thing, I think the strategy backfired because it was so gruesome and it was so barbaric and over the top what they did, that even the people here in Israel that were moderates, maybe even leaning left and were pro two-state, they just backtracked and said, no, this was so bad. And they just proved so strongly that this can happen that the prospect of Israelis, forget about world politics and all that crap, Israelis, people living here like us, even people who are like, okay, let them have land, let them maybe, I feel like the consensus has shifted now and people are like, no, now it's never going to happen. And people are so much more right wing, and the people who are coming up possibly after Netanyahu and people are getting into them are people that are much more right wing. People who won't even call it the West Bank and they call it Judea and Samaria. And so I think their entire strategy backfired, and you were starting to see the complete opposite effect. What do you think?
So first off, I think that's a really interesting question. It's something that I've never actually thought about it from that point of view. And I think that you're probably right, because if we think about it, like they had to have done this for a reason that was beyond they hate us and they wanted to kill as many of us as possible. And I kind of never thought about it beyond that, right? Like, why are they doing this? To drive us into the sea, to get us out of here? Because you're right. Like, I don't think there was going to be a world in which this worked, maybe to get a two-state solution, which let's be honest, we've offered them a two-state solution. They don't seem to really want it, right? So you're right in thinking that I never thought of it from that point of view, that maybe there was something deeper and beyond just wanting to kill us. But there had to be a reason beyond that, because there had to be like a final like plan, like, right, what was your goal? What was the goal that you wanted to achieve? The goal wasn't just, or was the goal just let's kill as many people as we possibly can? I almost feel like I don't think that it was meant to be as brutal as it was. I think it almost spiraled beyond the control of like what anybody thought would happen.
And that speaks to what the actual people who came in and their depravity.
Even the people who came in their depravity, I don't think the people that planned it even thought it would be as gruesome and as violent and as awful and as horrible as it actually was. I feel like,
So it just
sometimes
happened in the
like
spur of the moment because of who it was doing it.
I think so. Like, I think they, they're all hopped up on drugs themselves. They're all, they give them things. And I think that almost like, if a lot of people, like if you go to, I don't know, not that I've ever been to a rave, but you go to some kind of rave and everybody's riled up, like you get riled up by the crowd around you, right? The
So it
same
was
thing
the
when you go to
entire
a demonstration.
environment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you go to a demonstration on campus and you get more riled up because that's the atmosphere of what's going on around you. So I just find it so hard to believe that they went in knowing that it was going to be that violent and that horrible and as awful as it was, and that it really spiraled because the people who were attacked were caught so unaware. And so many things happened and had to happen. I mean, the fact that so many army bases were decimated, like that's impossible. Like that's just not possible. I mean, it happened, so it's possible, but that's why we know there was something going on behind, because it's literally impossible. You could say, okay, one army base, but really, three, four army bases, like really, like so. I think that it just went beyond what anybody thought, and then the question becomes, I mean, again, there are some pretty smart people even running their side, right? They've come up with some pretty smart things. You're right, they would have needed a final objective, but I can't imagine that the final objective was thinking that they were going to get the rest of the world to entirely kick us out of Israel so that they would have everything. So you're
Well,
right. What would be the fun?
certainly their strategy and what they do, and the strategy that I'm referring to is post October 7th. Let's say we get past the gruesomeness of October 7th, the way that they decided to play the propaganda game, that's all strategy. And for a little bit, it looked like it was working because they were getting support, so much so that we saw it on campuses in America, right? So they're even getting Westerners, immigrants, but they're and some woke Westerners to get on the bandwagon. But all of that is strategy. But it was so devastating, and what they continue to do is still executions and all this video stuff that they're putting out. The whole way that they're going about it, they're misreading I think they're misreading the Israeli population, and it's all backfiring. As an Israeli, you're in Israel. What do you feel? Granted, you never thought about this in general. What do you feel is the consensus amongst people? Because all I'm seeing is that people are just so much more right wing now, and so much more, pro right wing and conservative.
You're talking to someone who was born into an extremely right-wing family. So I've always been extremely right-wing. And yes, absolutely, I agree. There are definitely people. In fact, we're having one come speak this Thursday night in Efrat. We're having a survivor of Nativa Asara come to speak who lost her husband and one of her children, her ex-husband, and one of her children. And she was like, a peace now. Let me go pick them up and bring them to the hospital across the border, people who, and she's become extremely right wing. And I do think I think that we are hearing like what we hear. Like, again, I sit in Cinema City, that's where my office is. So I look at all the demonstrations. I see the right ones, I see the left ones. I saw it when it was, judicial reform. I saw what was going on both sides. And I can say that, I've always noticed in the world, like there's so much good that goes on in the world, but what do you hear about in the papers? You hear about the bad. Why? Because the good doesn't make a good story. The bad,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
crazy, that makes a great story. That's what people want to hear. So I almost feel like some of the few voices that are still left on the left are so loud. Like that's what people are hearing. But when I actually look down on their demonstrations, like the last demonstration, and they'll have one like, I mean, it's like, it's like a normal Tuesday. They're shutting down the roads outside of Cinema City. We're also annoyed by it, all the people who rent in Cinema City. I promise you, the last one they had a couple weeks ago, like if there were 1,500 people there, I'd be shocked. But they make it sound like it's so many more. Versus when it was judicial reform, there were thousands there. But I can
Mm.
tell you from sitting on the roof and watching it on both, the right wing demonstrations were more peaceful and they were much bigger. So I absolutely think that a lot of the support that they used to have isn't there anymore. But that faction of the country, for whatever reason, has a lot of money and has very loud voices. So they're trying to get people to believe. But we know even in America, like who's really demonstrating on college campuses? Exactly what you said. It was like people that were paid and like a few
Yeah.
crazy people. At the end of the day, Trump won. And he won by a lot.
Muslims,
Purple hair and people who are not American, who moved to America.
Meaning, I met people on Instagram since October 7th who literally told me, it made me sick to my stomach, but I voted for Trump. Like in my life, I've never not voted Democrat, but I could not vote for what's going on. And the end of the day, Trump won by a lot. So it means that we're still hearing these voices, but we have more support than we think, and we have more support for the right. And I definitely think in Israel, exactly like you said, most of the country is far more to the right. Anybody who's thinking anybody really, I mean, I hate to say it, but like with any type of critical thinking and half a brain is able to see what went on and to see that, what we tried to do since Oslo, that doesn't work. I always like in this country, like I always, and I said it in the Knesset, like I literally said it in a Vada in the Knesset, like, why do we behave like an abused wife? It's like we always, if I only gave more, if we gave
yeah,
them more, if we did more,
yeah, no.
they would love us. Like we've tried it since Oslo. It does not work. It's time to be strong. It's time to show our strength. And listen, the end of the day, I'm not going to say Bibi's always been perfect. And I don't know, there's some questions about things, but let me tell you something. Nobody else would have stood up to the world the way he has. I hope he's
He's
not going to back down now. Who knows? Because there is all this talk of a hostage negotiation deal, and
Yeah, one of my pet peeves is that as well, that we don't behave like it's our country. We behave like it's not our country, and our neighbors respond accordingly. If we actually behaved and felt convicted like it's ours, we would get more respect. It's also really interesting how all of this is coinciding with what's going on in America. Because if you think people are going to the right here and not willing to give up an inch of land and throwing the two-state solution under the bus completely and utterly, which is where it should be,
yes,
in America you have Trump, getting people into his group who they're so Christian for their own reasons. They're so pro-Israel. They don't even want to recognize the West Bank as legitimate Arab land or anything like that. So I think Israel is blessed that this unfortunate event happened right now at a time when America is so burnt out from the progressive left and all of that nonsense, that it's like coinciding now perfectly with the fact that Israel has to become more conservative and tougher and right wing. It's just an interesting point, but it seems to align the timing now. And now with Trump coming in, it'll be interesting. He's talking tough. I wonder if he'll actually do something. I don't know what America should do. Maybe send in troops. Like the fact that every multiple countries have hostages there and they've done nothing is just mind-boggling to me. All because it's a Jewish issue. If this was any other country, they would go in and take care of it. Because it's a Jewish issue and it's a hot topic, everyone's just standing on the sidelines and like it's unthinkable.
Sometimes I feel like this might sound a little weird or crazy, but sometimes I feel like Hashem is trying to send us a message to like wake up and stand up for yourself. Like exactly what you're saying. Like you've gone so far to the left, and America, like I have a lot of hakarat hatov for America because I got my career there. I was American born. There's a lot of good things about being America, and I do love America, though I consider myself Israeli first. But I feel like sometimes I feel like this is like almost like a message, like wake up, like stand up for yourself. Like yes, this thing happened, like it's meant to be like a wake up call. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously we know everything ultimately comes for God, but God also helps those that help themselves. So like we do have to do our part. We can't just sit back and say, "Oh no, God's going to take care of it." We have to do what we can as well. But I do think there is that piece that maybe some of it was meant to be like wake up. Like I've given you this country, you're back in this country, act exactly what you said. Act like it's your country.
Yeah, I've echoed a similar idea last year after October 7th. I was really looking at the spiritual aspect of it because everything's from Hashem, obviously. And a good barometer to see if we're doing the right thing is on the outcome. So it's 100% that Hashem is trying to reckon us to get back on the right track. The question is, did we get on the right track? Well, guess what? Here we are more than a year later, problem not solved. So is that an indication that we're still not quite there? We didn't, you know what I mean? If you get on the right track and you do the right things, you behave morally and ethically, problems get solved and they get solved quickly. Well, guess what? Maybe it's dragging out because we're not doing the right things. And that, speaks back to question one with the politics. You see politics gets involved. We're not doing the right thing. Problem doesn't get solved. Solutions, good solutions with good outcomes, healthy, strong outcomes is insight into whether you're making the right choices. We haven't gotten that yet, but with America, Israel, the whole onslaught of wokeism and all that, I think it's a correction, right? With Trump, it's a global correction because the whole world's sick of it. So we are correcting ourselves, but there's still a long way to go. My final question kind of ties into this last point that we made a little bit, the last point that you made. So making an aliyah. First of all, you can tell me briefly, you made aliyah. What's your story?
So I made Aliyah originally in 1984 with my family. There was no nefesh b'nefesh. Most people in those days went to a merkaz klita, which is what we did. We were in Kiryat Arba for a year and a half until our house in Efrat was ready. So I came as a 15-year-old. My family is Baal Tshuva. And when I was 13, my parents said, in 2 years, we're moving to Israel. And I said, that is so nice for you. I'm going to go live at Wendy's house and I'll come visit you like on vacations and in the summers. And they're like, no, no, you're going. So I came as a 15-year-old. I was dragged here and I spent a year and a half in the Ulpan on Kiryat Arba. And then an American school opened. And again, like my family's Baal Tshuva, I didn't really know what Haredi was. I didn't know what Black Hat was. But the Boston Rebbe opened up a school for like American girls that you would get a degree, you get a diploma from America. So in the middle of 11th grade, like after the Chagim in 11th grade, I left to go to this high school. And I met someone who is like my best friend to this day at that school. And at the end of the year, the principal and I decided that instead of 12th grade, she should let me graduate early and go to seminary. It would be better for everyone if she let me do that. And I did. And once I went to the seminary with Americans, I was like, I think I don't want to be here. I want to go back to America. So I left in 1987 at the end of my 12th grade seminary year. I went early. I left and I went to America. Within 1 week, I realized I'd become more Israeli than American. And I knew I wanted to live here. But I needed to get America out of my system. So in 1994, I came back here expecting to stay, but got married in 1998 to a South African who, after about 4 years, realized he wanted to be in America to start his career. And I wanted to study physical therapy. I really wanted to study physical therapy. And anybody who lives in Israel knows that getting in, it's like harder than getting into medical school, like as hard as getting into medical school. It's really, really hard. So I was kind of lazy too. I wasn't even going to try. And so I agreed to go to America for a few years because I wanted to study physical therapy, which is why I do have a lot of hakarat hatov for America as well, because I did get my PT degree there. And we came back in 2010. And my intention is to like never leave. Like this is, my intention is we're here. My kids are here. My kids are more Israeli than American. Like they don't even like to speak to me in English. And so that's kind of my journey in, brief of over 40 years of living here on and off.
Beautiful. So you're totally unbiased. I'm kidding. So my question is, making an aliyah in general, what are your thoughts on making aliyah in general for the general public? And what about making aliyah during turbulent times? Is it because for people who consider making aliyah, so for some people, they like after October 7th, they made aliyah. I actually just met somebody who's in my town. October 7th put it over the top. So for a lot of people, it actually did. I think aliyah applications went up, not down, because of what's going on in the world. Now, I don't know where it is now, if it went back down or if it's higher. Every year, I don't know. I know from the U.S., 20 to 40,000 people, I think, make aliyah. I don't know about globally, but for other people, it's like, no, Israel seems to be a very unsecure location, so I wouldn't want to move there. My question is this the worst of it, or does it? Because you might think like that was bad. Look, there was a terrorist attack in Israel. Then you saw what happened all over the world, and then you might think, well, the way that we look at it in Israel is like in the rest of these are like warnings. Things could get really bad in the rest of the world. The only place that could protect you just for being a Jew is Israel. So therefore, the safest place for a Jew is in Israel, because by default, by matter of fact, the job of the government is to protect you because of who you are. Whereas in other countries, when things go bad, it becomes the opposite. You get singled out because of who you are. Is this the worst of it, or like can we expect things to get worse? Meaning like, okay, this was a huge attack. Things settled down for 5-10 years. And then does something worse happen? And how does that tie into decision making for making aliyah?
So, first of all, I think that um, for me personally, there's no place I'd rather be. Terror attacks or not, there is no place I'd rather be. I feel way safer here, where at least we know who our enemies are,
Yeah.
than in America. I mean, look at what happened, right? There were these, I think, 3 terror attacks over the past few days in America, involving Muslims, involving Teslas and things that were blowing up. And I think that for me, there's no place I'd rather be than Israel. But I also do think like you have to feel it in your heart. And for whatever reason, like some people really do, and some people really don't. Like if someone says to me, like, what do you love about Israel? It's not always so easy to quantify exactly what it is. It's like something that you just feel like deep inside you. And for some reason, not everybody feels that, Like I think Hashem gave everyone like different tests and different whatever. And sometimes you have to do things even if you don't feel it, because then you'll get there. But I think that people are ultimately safer here. I think a lot of people are realizing that with everything going on, like I don't know how people send their kids to Columbia and Harvard and these other universities that were so involved in, these on-campus demonstrations that had their dean of students involved, not able to come out against what went on. Like they were so, left wing. So I would like to say I think Aliyah is for everyone, but I also know it's like it's a really hard thing. And again, it's not always easy. I'm not going to tell you that everything is really easy here. I mean, for me, I have my family here, A lot of people are coming, they don't have family here, but my parents came and they didn't have family here, and eventually everyone's here, like if you come, if you're the one that starts it, your kids have kids and hopefully more kids, and then, everyone's here. So for me, I'd like to say, yes, everybody should make Aliyah, but I know that that isn't what's necessarily right for each individual person, I guess.
And what
Even
about
though ultimately I think that the Jews should be in Israel, but that's my opinion.
ideologically, you believe that Jews belong in Israel? Same here. It's why I ended up, ultimately making Aliyah. Um, so I guess, I do believe you have to ideologically believe that you need to be here in the first place. Okay. Now, religious Jews already have that because they're praying 3 times a day. Now, it's one of the things I always say, like, I can't live with that inherent contradiction. Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim. Like, what are you talking about? Get on a plane and go to Yerushalayim. Like, stop. It's not theoretical. It's here. It's a plane ride.
I feel the same. Like when people are like, oh, let's go spend Pesach in Italy. Why, if you're going to go somewhere, would you go anywhere but Israel? Like you're saying L'Shana Haba Yerushalayim. Like, how do you go anywhere but Israel? Like, I don't get it. I mean, to each his own. But I personally I agree with you. But also I will also tell you that it always amazed me, how many religious people or kids, you send your kids to Zionistic religious school and then oh my gosh, your kids are 18 or 19 years old and they want to move to Israel. And the parents are like so shocked and they're so angry and they're so upset. I'm like, oh my God, they're not moving to Japan. They want to move to Israel. Like you sent them to like Jewish school. Like this is what they should want to do.
It's very common. Yeah. When you grow up with make Aliyah, then your kids are going to make Aliyah. And you see that a lot in the modern Orthodox world. Sadly and weirdly more than the Orthodox world. But okay. Um, so the part about making Aliyah during these times. So if you have the ideological belief and then you have faith in Hashem and leaving politics out, there has to be a leap of faith because some people will simply not consider it because they feel like the terrorism here and all of this stuff is too scary for them, essentially. So that means that anyone who comes around to understanding that they belong in Israel has to somehow also acquire the faith and the trust that Hashem will keep them secure, so on and so forth. Now, going back to what you said about feeling it here, I was watching an interview where Matisyahu was talking to somebody, and I don't think Matisyahu lives in Israel. He mentioned, and he was telling this guy, he was saying like, Israel is the place. Like that's where Judaism is happening, right? And I always like to say that, and this is my own feeling, my own experience was that like in Israel, you live Judaism, and in America, you practice it. I don't know how else to like give it over to a person. Like how do you feel about the difference is you kind of feel like you're practicing in America to be Jewish, and in Israel, you're actually living Judaism. And the reason for that is because the entire culture in Israel is Jewish. Everything's Jewish. On Hanukkah, the bus driver's hanging little, menorahs on his door, and
And the buses, Shana
and
Tova and the buses.
yeah, and in the U.S., it's the opposite. We're in a secular country trying to fit in as Jews. Automatically, we're influenced by the secular world. So, like, for example, on the East Coast, it'd be hardcore materialism, business, and money. That's all that life's about. And in other places, it's other things, but we're always influenced by who we're around. But guess what? Israel is a Jewish culture. So the influence here is all Jewish. So I was thinking about this just earlier. I'm going to the gym and I'm thinking about this. I was like, why is this so different here? Like, what is this feeling that people talk about? Blah, blah, blah. And it just hits me more and more the longer I'm here. And I'm only here 4 years. And I'm starting to realize that time, specifically long durations of time, really help you understand the core differences of like what it means to really feel. Like 1 year in, you have one understanding. 2 years in, you have another understanding. Like many, many years in, you start realizing how big the difference is and why people love it here and like what it means to be around Jews and how the value system is different. So a lot of time, the only way to really understand why people like us talk the way we talk is to be here for long periods of time. You're here for a couple of years, you'll understand. If you come and visit, no, yes, no. You're walking down Jaffa or Ben Yehuda, you think you have it figured out. Like you're going where tourists go, and you're not living it. So that's really interesting. And I'm here, like I said, 4 years, and it still comes up in my mind day to day because the longer you're here, you feel a deeper connection and a deeper understanding, a deeper appreciation for actually making that move. I'm like, what's changed? I was already sold 4 years ago and 8 years ago before I moved. So like, why am I enjoying it now more? It starts really like going in deep.
Do your kids speak to each other in Hebrew yet?
So I have one child. I have two children here now, but one's an infant and the other one is only 2 or 3. So
Well, wait till
not so
they come
relevant.
home and they're speaking to each other in Hebrew. My kids speak to each other in Hebrew. And they speak to me in Hebrew half the time, and I just
Yeah, it's
answer
so
them in
cute.
English.
Even my 2-year-old, which is almost 3, is already speaks Hebrew and English, and it's adorable. And I'm on my slow journey to learning Hebrew, but it's absolutely amazing. Okay, so before I shut off, is there anything else that you want to discuss or go over? I covered all of my questions.
No, I think this was it. Like I really enjoyed it. These are all things, these are all issues that I really enjoy speaking about, even though my kids think no one values my opinion on these subjects. Like these are all questions that I found very interesting. And, I spent a lot of time since October 7th as a physical therapist. All of my social media used to be about physical therapy, and I changed it for about over a year. Like I was really trying to do pro-Israel advocacy, and I'm someone who I like to give my opinion. So, but again, I understand that it's just that people don't have to agree with me. And,
People,
I had a
no,
lot of that
people.
during COVID,
I want
but
to ensure you that people do care about these topics. First of all, children, they're in a different world they're in a different online virtual world. They're hanging out in different, they're
well,
hanging out
mine
in
are kind
different,
of adult children. They're not little, but yeah.
because there's a huge segment of the population who care about big ideas. I'm always trying to inspire people to think about things. Everyone thinks about everything, but think about things from a certain perspective. I could get hung up on politics all day, but politics is entertainment. I look at the ethics and the morality behind some of the bigger decisions and what's going on. Why? So I sleep well at night. So I understand why we're making the decisions we make as a proper religious Jew. Are we making the right choices? Am I living the correct way? That's what matters to me. Obviously, it touches on politics a bit. So I'm always trying to inspire people to think about things from a certain way, from an intellectual realm. Think about the root and the shoresh behind those things, not the outer layers. These days with kids and the social media, everything's outer layer, and they don't understand the root of these deeper issues. There's a lot of people now with long form podcasts, as you know yourself. There are people who are interested in this stuff, and it's a matter of getting it out there.
No, I
Um,
really like it. I like that making people think differently because I'm someone who's always prided myself on trying to see everybody's point of view. Like, meaning, even if I don't agree with you, I can understand where you're coming from and I can understand why you might think the way you think. I may not agree with you, but I understand why you think that way. And so I think that that's really important. And I think that question that you asked about, what was the end game? What were they thinking? What were they hoping to get out of this? I think that was a great question.
Certainly. Thank you so much for coming on. Until next time, God bless you.
My pleasure.
Let me
Thank you so much.
Leave a like and subscribe.